Our next module within B3 is Performance Management Part 2. And what exactly do we have to cover in this module? Return on investment, return on equity, and DuPont model, residual income, and finally the economic value added. Let us first discuss the return on investment. Return on investment is simply income of a specific segment or a company as a whole divided by the investment capital, or sometimes we can calculate this way. Return on investment is equal to income upon sales, or sales into sales upon the average investment or just investment. This is your profit margin and this is the investment turnover, and if you simplify sales cancelled out, you get the original formula, income upon investment capital. The benefit of this breakdown is that you can see the ROI depends upon the profit margin and investment turnover. These are the components of ROI. So if you have higher net profit margin, ROI would be higher, and higher investment turnover get you a higher ROI, and if both are in the upside, you will have the greatest ROI. This has been laid out this way, which I've just solved. Return on investment is profit margin into investment turnover. Profit margin itself is income upon sales, and sales upon invested capital, already discussed. Now the next, a good example on return on investment. Assume that sales are 1 million, net income 40, invested capital is 250. The organization's required rate of return is 12%. ROI is to be calculated. So either you can calculate it directly by taking your net income and dividing it with the invested capital, 40 by 250 times 100, that gives you 16%. Or if you want to go for the extended version, ROI is equal to profit margin, that is net income upon sales, that's 1 million. And then multiply it with the investment turnover, that is sales upon assets, 250. And then you can get up and you will get the same result, 16%. It's just that it's decomposed into the profit margin and the investment turnover. Help you understand things in a finer way. Next is return on assets, that is the net income upon the average total assets. Remember, whenever you combine an income statement item with a balance sheet item, since income statement is for the whole period, but balance sheet is on a particular point in time, so it's recommended that you should take the opening and closing assets and take the average. So whenever an income statement item is linked with the balance sheet item, balance sheet numbers must be average so as to give you the similar numerator and denominator. Now, in the denominator on average total assets, we can either use the net book value, which is the original historical cost, minus the accumulated depreciation. You can take this as a denominator, or you may take the original historical cost, the what you call the gross book value, right? Alternatively, you can use replacement costs also. What is replacement cost? Cost to replace assets at their current level of utility, or you may use the liquidation value, that is the selling price of the asset as if it is available right now. It's totally your choice what the denominator you want to use on your return on assets formula. There are some limitations to ROI and ROA issues. The first limitation is short-term focus. Some managers, in order to increase their return on investment or return on asset, they tend to invest less on the assets. So having a smaller denominator means the ratio would be higher. So this clearly is focusing on the short term and giving up the long-term profit potential of the firm, and disincentive to invest. The same idea that firm would like to generate more profit, but the segment manager, they would tend to have less investments in long-term assets so as to artificially keep the denominator lower, and that in turn will give you the higher return on assets. Maybe they will be able to get the bonus they intend to get, but for the firm as a whole, this could be not good. See, this is the important point here. Adjustments to ROI denominator raise the bar on assets. If the denominator is bigger, that will lower the ROI, right? So the higher the denominator used in ROI computation, the lower the return, and that is the reason. There is a reason there is disinvestment to invest, because managers tend to invest less in the assets so as to have a lower denominator so as to get the high return on assets and return on investment. Next is the return on equity and DuPont model. Return on equity, it's a critical measure This is how we calculate return on equity, net income upon equity. Ideally, you should take average equity, but if the ending numbers are given on the balance sheet on the question, so just take net income upon equity. So we can extend this return on equity formula by breaking it down into its components. Let us discuss these one by one. Net profit margin, we know net profit margin is net income upon sales. Net income margin is a measure of operating efficiency, how well the firm has generated profit based upon sales. Assets turnover. Assets turnover is a measure of degree of efficiency with which company is using its assets. Sales upon assets, like for example, if the sale generated is $100,000 by using just $50,000 worth of assets, it's 2 to 1. It means for every $1 invested in the assets, we have generated $2 of sales. This is the efficiency with which we have used our assets. The third one is the financial leverage. Financial leverage measures the extent to which the company uses debt in its capital structure. How do we calculate this? Assets, we know, is equal to equity plus loans, right? Equity plus loans upon equity. Now you can see, if we have a greater proportion of loans in our assets, in our capital structure, it will result in higher financial leverage. So financial leverage measures the extent to which the company uses debt in its capital structure. Now let us discuss the other three components. Tax burden. Tax burden is the extent to which the company retains profit after paying taxes. Let's say your net income, pre-tax income was $100,000, and after paying tax at 40%, what you are left with is 60. So if you simplify, what you get is 0.6, or you can call it 0.6:1. If you earn $1, after paying taxes, you are left with only 0.6. So the debt burden is comparatively higher. Talk about the jurisdiction where I work. Our average tax rate is 30%. So in that case, you will have 100,000 denominator. After paying tax, you get $70,000 as your net income. So it's 0.7 to 1. So for every $1 earned, after paying tax, I get 0.7. So the tax burden in this case is higher, here lower. The next component, remember in the previous slide, you may call it equity plus liabilities. I've just written loan. So equity plus liabilities, basically the right equation is asset is equal to equity plus liabilities. I've just given you the idea that mostly we are interested in long-term loans, bonds, etc. Okay, the next part is the interest burden. Interest burden reflects how much in pre-tax income a company retains after paying interest to the debt holders. Something similar to tax burden. Here we had net income upon pre-tax income. Here we have pre-tax income, that is the income after interest, and this is the income before interest. Just like this is the income after tax and this is the income before tax. So the dynamics are the same. So let's say if your earning before interest and taxes is $100,000 and you pay interest but not tax yet. After paying interest, you get only 80. So if simplify, it's 0.8:1. For every $1 you earn, 0.2 is taken away by interest, remaining is 0.8. If the tax burden is higher for a firm, let's say a firm generates $100,000 of interest, earning before interest and taxes, and after paying interest, you are left only with 40. So what you get is 0.4. So you can see for this firm, every $1 earned in earning before interest and tax, after paying interest, you are left with only 0.4. So here the tax burden is higher, here lower. The last one is the EBIT margin, which I'm sure you know is earning before interest and tax upon sales, similar to the net profit margin. Now, DuPont analysis breaks down your ROE into these components we just discussed. Let us see one by one. An approach that can be used to analyze return on equity is to break down ROE into different ratios. This is our original return on equity. It can first be split into two components, which we have already done previously. Net income upon revenue, that is your net profit margin. Revenue upon average equity. This is called equity turnover. So net profit margin into equity turnover. So ROE can be split into these two components, analyzed separately. Then we can go for three-way analysis in which we take net income and revenue, that is your net profit margin. Then revenue upon average total assets, discussed earlier, that is assets turnover. And the last one is the average total assets upon equity, that is the leverage ratio. So we can split our ROE into three components: net profit margin, assets turnover, and leverage ratio. And finally, we can extend the DuPont model into its 5 components. This is the extended DuPont equation or the 5-way DuPont equation. in which what we have, let us discuss these one by one. The extended version first contains the tax burden, net income upon EBT, that's we just discussed a little while ago. Then the interest burden, EBT upon earning before interest and tax. Then the EBT margin, we just discussed a little while ago. Assets turnover, and finally the financial leverage. So ROE can be broken down to its component and can be further analyzed. So average assets and average equity should be used when calculating ROE. The reason being, ROE takes in the net income in the numerator for the whole period. So if you take the number from the balance sheet, they must be averaged ideally. So you should use average equity or the average assets. But if a CPA exam only gives the ending assets or the ending equity, then of course you have no choice. These amounts may be used to calculate the ROE. Now here is an extended question here for you. Blake Company reports the following in its 5 years financial statements: sales, gross profit, EBIT, pre-tax income, tax, net income, and we have the assets, liabilities and equity. Calculate each of the individual components ratio of Blake as well as the ROE for Blake using both the DuPont model and the extended DuPont model. So if you just calculate return on equity directly using the numbers here, 42,000 would be the net income in the numerator, and equity $600,000. So that gives you 7%, right? If you break down the ROE into its component, let us do it. Tax burden, interest burden, EBIT margin, assets turnover, financial leverage. Let's do them all. Okay, so net income, here we have 42. EBT earning before tax, it's 60. Tax burden, the interest burden, EBT, that is 60,000. EBIT, that is 75. Okay, then EBIT, earning before interest and tax, is 75. Revenue is 500,000. Then again, revenue in the numerator, 500,000. Average assets, we can't take average, just take what is given, 900,000. Again, average assets, 900,000, divided by the average equity, which is just 600. Okay, now let me write down the numbers. Okay, so your tax burden is 0.70. Your interest burden is 0.80. Your EBIT margin is 0.15. Your assets turnover is 0.56. And finally, your financial leverage is 1.5. See, if you multiply all of these, you will get 0.07, or which basically is 7%. So either using the simplest one or using the two-way version or the three-way or the five-way, it remains the same. It's just that it results in finer breakdown where you can analyze things in more detail. Pass key. It is important to note that both methods of calculating ROE, the simpler one DuPont or the extended DuPont, produce the same number as we just seen a little while ago. By breaking out the calculation into different components, management can get a better understanding of what factors are driving ROE and how those factors compare relative to competing companies and to the industry overall. So that completes your return on equity and DuPont model. Next we have residual income. This is how we calculate residual income. Residual income is net income from the income statement minus the required return. And what is required return? Required return is the hurdle rate. Mostly it is taken as weighted average cost of capital or any other arbitrarily selected rate by the management multiplied by the net book value of equity. Now if you compare it with the return on investments, it was income upon the investment or the assets. If you are taking ROI, is going to be investment, or ROA, in that case you will have the denominator assets. Now important point here to note, if the performance is being evaluated based upon ROI, and of course the result would be in percentages, in that case the segment manager whose performance is evaluated on ROI would not accept those projects generating ROI less than the ROI he is currently generating. But on the other hand, residual income is good measure. It is better measure of performance than ROI, because residual income just requires you to earn above the required rate of return. It has to be positive. ROI can be positive when the net income from income statement is more than the required rate of return. and RI would be negative when the income is less than the required rate of return. So here, if RI is used as performance evaluation tool, then the segment manager would be interested to generate positive RI, not the percentage to be higher than the current rate that he's earning from his segments, right? So that's why RI is a better performance evaluation tool. It results in goal congruence. Right now, let me give you an example. Let's say we have two managers, A and B. Manager A is evaluated on the basis of ROI and manager B on the basis of RI. Company requires each project to generate at least 10% return. The manager A is currently generating 25% return. If there is a new project that is capable to generate 18% ROI, and if this project is offered to A would say, no, I am currently generating 25%. I won't take a project that generates less than 18%. But if the same project is offered to manager B will see that any project generating above 10% will give the positive residual income. He will go for it. See, here B and the company, they are on the same page. That's what you call the goal congruence, but A would reject it. That's why, comparatively speaking, RI is a better measure. It results in goal congruence. InstaFab Manufacturing has an investment in its Southeast regional plant with the net book value of $200,000. In first step, expected hurdle rate is 10% and the division's net income is $30,000. So what you will do, 30,000 less the required rate of return, which is 10% of 200,000. 30,000 less 20,000, that is 10,000. So it has generated a positive residual income because the return generated is more than the return required. Advantages. There are advantages to residual income. It sets realistic targets in the absolute dollar terms. It results in goal congruence and it is based upon dollar-based measure. Whereas ROI, the result is in percentages. That is an advantage. But there is a weakness also, a couple of weaknesses. The first weakness is that when you're comparing two different segments, A and B, two different divisions, comparing these two different segments of unequal size could be misleading because this could generate a much significant RI in dollars, and for this unit, this segment, RI could be much less. But had they been compared based on ROI, then it's possible because the result in percentages, so comparison in percentages is much easier, but based on residual income, dollar-based comparison could be misleading because of the different sizes of these segments, right? And then finally, the second weakness, use of judgment in the rate selection. When you calculate residual income, you need to select the hurdle rate, and that could sometimes be viewed as inappropriate, arbitrarily selected rate, so that could distort the results, the numbers for comparison purposes. The last topic we have is the economic value added. It is similar to residual income, very similar to residual income. It often incorporates several accounting adjustments prior to application into the model. We will just be learning the basic version of the formula. That's how we calculate the economic value added. Net operating profit after taxes, NOPAT, minus required return. And how do we calculate required return? Investment into the weighted average cost of capital. Just apply this formula. You won't have to make any adjustment. This is not part of your syllabus. Take the numbers, plug in it, and you get your answer. And let's say, just talk briefly, what about the adjustments? An economist views profit as revenue less implicit and explicit cost. Opportunity cost is also considered by economists when they calculate profit. But in case of accountant has a much short version, short view, just revenues and the explicit cost, just this part only. So you can see here the economic profit will always be less than the accounting profit. Or if there is a loss, economic loss would always be higher than the accounting loss. Right, that's the basic idea. And how do we bring and what adjustments are needed? That is not part of the syllabus. You just need to know if the EVA is positive, that means the performance is meeting standard. You are generating more returns than the required. If EVA is negative, that means performance is not meeting the standard. Then components of EVA. Some adjustment, you just need to know. You don't have to actually make these adjustments on the numbers. You just need to know what is basically involved. Research and development, which is expensed on the income statement. Under the US GAAP, research and development both are expensed. But since the benefit of these expenses will last many years into the future, so research and development is in fact reversed and it is capitalized. Expense is removed from the income statement and it is made an asset. Further, the items on the balance sheet are taken on the current valuation basis. And non-cash items are removed, and deferred taxes, if there are, they are also ignored. So these are just few adjustments. Otherwise, there are quite a lots of adjustments. So such adjustments are made so as to calculate EVA for the performance evaluation purpose. Let us just try to do this simple example to explain the idea. Kind of question you will expect on your exam. You need to calculate economic value added. We know the formula, that is net operating profit after taxes minus cost of capital or weighted average cost of capital multiplied by the investment, right? So let's plug in the numbers. Infrastep Manufacturing has an investment in its Southeast regional plant with an investment of $300,000. After adjustment for capitalization and all that we just discussed briefly, they will all be already be made. You just have to take the numbers. The company's cost of capital is 12% and its division produces a net operating profit after taxes, NOPAT, of $50,000. So $50,000 less 12% of 300,000, that is 36. So our NOPAT is 50 less 36. So economic value added is 14,000. It is positive, and as we have just discussed, if the EVA is positive, that means performance is meeting the standard or is above the standard, and negative means the performance is not meeting the standard. And that's a simple way. The question that you will see in your exam would be as straightforward as this one, and more so the question in Bacon will also be somewhat similar. Just need to take the numbers. No adjustment is required. That's all for this module.